Hey guys, Dustin Nguyen, and you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder, and you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Paul Dini, listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, and you're listening to Bat Force Radio, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Bat Force Radio, the Batman and DC podcast with no limits. We are all locked safely in our homes, as hopefully all of you are, as we just talk about comics. Today we have got Bat Force Tom in California.
How you doing?
Grandpa Batman in Texas.
Howdy.
And I'm Robin Cross in Canada. And today's guest joining us is known for his work on titles like Batman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, Supergirl, and the Batman Shadow crossover, and he is about to begin his first work for Marvel Comics on Darkhold #1, along with Cian Tormey, who we spoke with just a couple weeks ago. Welcome to the show, Mr. Steve Orlando. Thanks so much for being here, Steve. How are, notwithstanding the current situation, how's life?
It's good. It's relatively... again, and I stress relatively unchanged for freelancers. As long as we still have comics coming in to write, and they're eventually going to be coming out to you. I mean, I'm not going to the gym every day, but otherwise, it's I've been working from home for 6 years, so it was a pretty easy adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of creators are right now saying, "Oh, what? I can't go out," as if I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Exactly.
You were hitting the gym pretty hard though, man. So that's a big adjustment. So what have you been doing? Like, have you been trying to keep up with it, or is it just at this?
I still do a lot. It's just in my house, or I'm running outside. I'll wrap up work after this today, and then I'm gonna. It's a long run day, so I'll go, and there's an arboretum behind my guy's place, so we will run there, and
Nice.
we're just trying to not backslide too much. I'm sure my neighbors across the street have bizarre opinions about the hour and a half of office work or office exercise I do, but whatever. I mean, I'm going a little insane, let's be clear, lifting dumbbells in my house, but such is life in a time of pandemic.
I saw where a guy ran a whole marathon in his backyard. He just ran circles.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's the type of mania that I will never personally have.
It's like a rat in a cage on a spin wheel.
Yeah, that's a little bit above my level of madness right now, at least. But let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So, as it's your first time on the show, if you wouldn't mind, what is your comics origin story? What was the thing that made you decide this was what you wanted to do?
Well, I started going to conventions and trying to break into comics when I was 12 years old.
Wow.
It was a long run, because I didn't really get in until, by some metrics, 28 or 29. So it took a minute, but we got there. As to why with comics, I was very interested in art as a kid. I've been reading comics since I was, or at least looking at them since the mid 80s when I was younger. But at the same time, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And then Electric Superman came around, and this was around the time I also realized that my visual art was not something that I really thought. I mean, I can do it. I actually wrote and illustrated an entire book in college for my thesis. So I've done everything involved with making a comic from top to bottom. But it was clear where my hypothetical talents lie. I mean, it's up to you guys to decide my talents. But it's where the things that I could get paid for lied. We're going to be in writing. And I realized that first when I was looking at this editorial about how they came up with Electric Superman back when I was living in Syracuse. Because that was right when I first started buying, like, off-the-rack weekly books. I've been reading comics since the 80s, but we didn't have, like, a drug market comic store where I lived at first. So It was like flea market stuff, West Coast Avengers back issues that I bought, or it'd be like whatever issue of Clone Saga that I had at Walden Books in the spinner rack, you know. But then we got one, got into Grant and Howard's JLA, and I was deep in at that point, and that's just when Superman had become electric, and Shirley was never going to go back to how he was, and so I thought it was jumping on point. And that's when I sort of learned the different jobs and what I thought would be most interesting to me. And within a period of years is when Marvel did the Nuff Set event, and at that point, Grant, who was the main person I was following at that time, was on New X-Men. They did the Nuff Set issue. I got to see what his scripts looked like, and it was off to the races. I was taking my bad scripts to conventions and asking writers for advice, and for 20 years did that until someone decided I was finally worth. I had finally come to a professional level, at least the baseline of professionalism, and that's how we landed my first book at Image, and that book led to my first book at DC after a lot of time building relationships there.
What, at 12 years old, 12 years old, having your stuff together enough to know to start going to conventions to like break into it. Like, what was that timing kind of like? Because I when I look back when I was 12, I don't even remember what I was doing. I was like I knew I was not putting things together to present for a career. That's crazy.
I was probably not choosing my own pajamas at 12.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't think of much else I wanted to do, and I didn't see a reason. And I'm also extremely egotistical, so I definitely thought that my scripts at 12 were, on par with what was coming out. This is obviously a lie. I mean, someday I'll maybe find the things I brought to Wizard World 2000, which was my first con. And it's real bad. It's like Beast watching Emerald live. Because, I learned weird things from comics. I had read Starman, and I was like, oh, what makes characters relatable is topical pop culture references. So, I had this whole scene of like Scott coming in, and here's Beast being like, oh, I'm watching, my favorite cooking show, boom, because I knew I couldn't say bam because of copyright law. I was always acutely aware, bizarrely, of copyright law. When I was in 5th grade, I really wanted to do a book about how the Pillsbury Doughboy was a superhero, but I knew I didn't own the Pillsbury Doughboy and could get sued for that as a 5th grader, which is, unlikely, but it was a worry of mine. So I made a book called Clone Dough, and it was the Pillsbury Doughboy, but his cape was plaid and not blue, and thus he was a different character. It worked for Mortal Kombat. So
who was your dream artist for Clone Dough?
I drew that shit myself, and it was
Can you share some of that on your socials?
Oh, it's gone. It's gone. I think I might still be up in my 5th grade teacher's room if she's not a fossil yet. I think one of my teachers does have a Spider-Man I drew in like 3rd grade or 4th grade, which is more to me.
I think Riley Rossma would draw the hell out of Clone Dough.
Well, he does like weird body horror. That's why we get along together. So
I think at 12 years old, I was drawing photos of like my life, and I remember one time. My dad took me to get a haircut that sucked, and I drew this photo of this kid sitting in a chair, basically just getting a bowl cut, and I titled it "He's Mad at the Barber," and that was my comics. Beginning.
Sounds like Steve was a little ahead of you.
He's a little bit more advanced than me, obviously, and it's worked out well for him now.
Well, I didn't, I was not a huge fan of the popular children's sports, so we had to find another outlet. I was never good at baseball, football, or lacrosse, being from the Northeast. So,
but at 12 years old, like you knew enough about what you loved that no, this is what I'm gonna do. That's like nothing else. This is it.
Well, we hoped, but at the same time. There's less jobs at DC Comics than there are at the New York Yankees. So I knew it was unlikely. I mean, I went to college and I was a Russian lit major, so extremely useful. And so I took the natural path, and I was a wine and food specialist for like 10 years before I broke into comics. So I had no illusions over the fact that I was just going to slide right in to the comics industry. But it's I'm an intensely stubborn person, and was not willing to quit. It's why I think a lot of my mentors, my main mentors, Steve Siegel and Joe Kelly from Man of Action, I think that they respected that because, as I talk to them now, it's like, there were a ton of kids like you who were like 13 or 14 who we gave really overly harsh advice to and said to come back next year. But the difference is you came back every year for 20 years.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't. And, I owe everything, a lot of my attitude, including my brusqueness to Steve Siegel, but it was helpful, I mean, every year I would bring him a new book and he would say, well, he didn't really waste time on what was good because that's what your mom's for, he would say. And he would tell me, what needed to become stronger to be a professional level. And he had always said when I finally didn't have anything in that category, he would, push me in the right direction. And sure enough, when I did, he handed my pitch to Eric Stevenson, and that's how my book Undertow got approved, and so he made good on a promise. It was just a 2-decade promise, and I think that he liked that I was belligerent and willing to stop.
That's awesome.
I don't know if this was if you were working in editorial or something, but at some point I had read that in your early days that you were working with or working under Will Dennis.
No, I was not working in editorial. I mean, Will was another guy. Will was one of my first contacts at DC, so I was never working under him per se, but he was another guy who, like, every couple months would check in with me, and I would send him pitches, and we would always try to get something off the ground, to varying levels of success. I mean, that said, Will gave me my first work at DC, which was in the Strange Adventures anthology in, like, 2012. So he was another guy that was like, when the stars align right and I can help you out, I will. And sure enough, they did. It just took 12 years.
Oh, what's that like to be this guy trying to break into the industry and have Will Dennis in your corner trying to help you get there?
I mean, Will is an asset. He is another guy like Siegel that doesn't really beat around the bush. I think I was lucky that there's a lot of lip service providers in the entertainment industry, but I, by chance or fortune, ended up with people looking after me when I was younger that were not really in that business. So, I mean, Will would tell me when something was crap and had no shot, and then he would tell me when things had a shot, and then he would tell me when he couldn't get him over the home plate, So we did that dance for a long time, and again, when I had finally gotten to a place in the early 2010s where I was doing professional level work, he gave me my first and my second gigs, which were both Vertigo anthology shorts.
Yeah, you've sort of sprinkled around a lot of those anthologies. Like it's always fun to find some of your work in. To this day, DC puts out those like 80-page anthologies, and you can usually find something from yourself in those as well.
Yeah, I mean, they're a fun little challenge. There's one that hasn't been announced yet too, from before I sort of made my semi-exit from DC, and it's fun. It's hard. The crazy thing is that they give those 8-page stories for people to break in, but it's way harder to tell a complete 8-page story than it is to tell a complete 20-page story. So it should be the reverse. Obviously, the 8-page stories cost less, so that's why they do it that way.
Nice.
Now, some of the things that some of the longer runs that you did, like obviously the really public stuff like Wonder Woman, and specifically I wanted to ask about Martian Manhunter. How does that come about that you end up taking on Martian Manhunter for doing the 12-issue maxi?
I mean, I labored for that. Like, he's been my favorite character, probably because Grant wrote him so well in Justice League, and that's my first foray into the DC universe, outside of like trading cards and things, as I was saying. So, I mean, he always stood out to me, and not just the design, but his powers, his sort of stoicism. And so when we were coming off Batman in the Shadow, which is the Shadow is my favorite character, not my favorite DC character, but my favorite character. So having done that with Riley, it was our second book together after we did Night of the Monster Man, and I just realized that we'd like to do something to build on that, and we sort of brought that together ourselves. We developed some concept art for it. I sat down with Dan at San Diego Comic-Con 2017 and just labored hard for it, and we got it across the plate. I think the success of Mr. Miracle helped us because it was the same format, and coming out of it, it's one of my favorite things I've ever done, DC or not.
Yeah, I remember reading before it started that you had said something about that you had wanted to write that story your whole life, and between your passion for that character and Riley's art being absolutely perfect for Martian Manhunter and for that story, because they with the mix of the Earth stuff and the Mars stuff, everything just really clicked on that book.
Yeah, and I will not take credit for Riley's art because he's incredible and probably my favorite collaborator. But what I will say is that I will take credit for the fact that he had no idea who that character was before I explained to him why it was the perfect book for us to do. So I'll take credit for the casting on that book, and then I just got out of the way and let him do his incredible thing that he does.
I have to say that you surprised me. Spoilers if anyone hasn't finished it yet, but you surprised me with giving him a happy ending. I don't know why, but I was expecting a tragic end.
Well, the tragic. I guess the reality of that book is trying to make it more like life, and it's he has a tragic end, but like all of us realize it's not really the end, right? Like he has his low point in issue 6. But, in real life, we got to find out what to do the next day. And so that's actually a lot of what the book is about. Like he essentially has 2 reverse arcs, his Mars one going as low as he possibly can go. And then that's where his Earth one starts. And he finally finds a way to get actually even higher than he ever was on Mars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's an important message to me. If we're going to do a book about the most, quote unquote, the most human character in the DC universe, as people like to say, then I want it to be a good message, even if it's one of struggle, because that's real life. But at the same time, we don't want to. It's important for me to show that it was about having these intense, very human, even if they're sort of painted in this bizarre Martian culture. Series of problems, but then it's a book about overcoming those things. It's a book about how, if John was a character, I assume realized that your Supermans and your Wonder Women and all these people would look to. We love to say he's the heart and soul of the Justice League. Well, how much must he have overcome and suffered and surpassed for people like Wonder Woman and Superman to say, oh, well, whatever's going on in my life, this guy gets it. When I really thought about that, I realized his struggle and his eventual triumph had to be extremely profound for them to know it and look at him and be sure that he's the one that would always understand and that they can look to for a shoulder.
That's a great way of characterizing him. That I never really thought of. The Titans or the Trinity that people kind of think and relate to most are actually looking towards him for kind of inspiration. But when you started that series, I think from what I remember at the time, there was a big lack of Martian Manhunter in DC at the time. Was it a kind of a mix of you always just wanted to work on that character, or was it also like, hey, we need to bring this guy back right now?
Oh, it was just I always wanted to work on that character. We actually, I had known that. I had known that Scott was going to be doing stuff in the modern book, the Justice League book with him, pretty big. Mm. So it was a nice confluence of events where he's getting this evergreen sort of adult series at the same time as he's getting this very mainstream treatment in Justice League. But the key for us was just telling a story with him that was going to really be the iconic Martian Manhunter story, which is what we hoped we did. And we had to wait a little bit. When I joined DC, with DCYOU, my friend Rob Williams was doing a Martian Manhunter book, and it's unfortunate that I ended up being friends with him because when I saw that, I immediately thought about just murdering him at the. But it turns out I enjoyed his Welsh charm, and we became friends. So I wanted to and I enjoyed that book a lot as a science, especially in like a high-minded sort of almost Philip K. Dick science fiction book. So I wanted to, before I pitched Martian Manhunter, there was this push and pull of like, this is my favorite character. I got to get this going, before the worm turns, because who knows, anything can happen. It's not like I'm going to be here forever. And I also don't want to just steamroll Rob's book. So it was a delicate balancing act. But I don't know, getting that book approved is probably my favorite thing that I did at DC. So
Wow.
I'll always be very proud of that.
I would say, it's great to hear that's a big pride of yours. I would also have to highlight for you, if our listeners don't know, your run on Midnighter and Apollo. Because that's, when I think of you, that's kind of like what I think of to stand out, especially because it was such an impactful thing for a lot of, younger readers in general, is the kind of the representation that you gave for those characters and for readers as well. That was a good, I think you said at one time, this is the story that comics needs right now at the time. And it seems like that's the kind of guy that you are, where you look and see what inspires you and what would be a great story for people to kind of get inspired by. What do you think is something that people need right now?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm proud of Midnighter. It's been interesting. It's 6 years ago, and I think I've done a lot of work that, as you said, I've been continuing that credo with a lot of work since then. And it's always going to continue. I don't know what my next sort of main series like that is going to be. I'm doing this book at Marvel, Darkhold, but that is very much like a blockbuster, which is a different it's a different thing altogether. When it comes to storytelling, it's interesting because I don't know. You want to say we need something that is going to sort of bring us together right now and remind us that we're here for each other. But I think like any person in this country, I'm struggling with that notion when there seems to be very little that could actually do that.
Right.
So that is both my answer, but I also don't have the solution right now. Like, it's hard to write. I'm doing this book, hopefully an original, and in the next year and a half. And it's funny, like, there's this idea, like, how can you write any type of satirical political element right now? What is unbelievable? And so it's hard. Like, I desperately, as a person, don't want to believe. And I don't want to talk about this for the whole show, but it is challenging. Throughout the current administration, it's been hard to be on Wonder Woman and be on Supergirl before that and write about compassion in a time when we seem like we're severely lacking it.
Yeah.
And it gives me pause. And if anything, I think we need to be doing it even more. But I also wonder, half the time it feels like fiction is supposed to be, we hope that the world is like we write about in these books, so that it could keep going in that direction. But it's hard, it's hard to answer that question, in a time of global pandemic when we're still playing, the blame game.
Yeah.
As hundreds and hundreds of our fellow citizens die. So it's tough. I want to say compassion. That's the thing. Like, it came upon me that, like, especially on Wonder Woman, someone who puts compassion before violence, like, it's wish fulfillment, and I wish it wasn't, but I do still think we need that right now. I think we need it more than ever. And I don't know exactly how to crack that, because like many creators and perhaps other people, I was naive in thinking, it just takes the right point of view. It just takes the right story, the right anecdote, the right narrative to show people that you should care about other people. But but here we are, and it does unfortunately make me wonder. Maybe some people just truly don't, and that's been a challenge in of itself. I was talking to Phil Jimenez about Wonder Woman in that respect, and he really put it in perspective for me, even though it's a little dark. He said, like what Diana thinks, because as I write her, Diana doesn't really think anyone is beyond redemption, and she does think that if people could just see that what they were doing was harmful, then they wouldn't want to do it. And Phil said, okay, well, what happens when she meets just someone who actually is a sociopath, who just doesn't work that way? What would that do to her? And that, it inspired me for some of the things that have happened on the book when she meets Gorilla Grodd in the annual, and she says, oh, well, can't you see that if you did things a different way, there wouldn't have to be this warring, this warlike situation? And he says, well, it's not that I don't understand, I don't misunderstand, I just don't want peace, And so she's had to wrestle with that. What I've done is sort of put my indecision into these books and my disenfranchisement into these books, because it's tough, again, I have I'm happy for every single reader that we have in comics, but it always breaks my heart when I see people who will have #1 Superman fan, down with Islam, down with Dems. Do you even understand the character you're reading? How do those two things happen? And it saddens me, and I don't know how to solve it, I guess is what I'm saying, because I can't understand a mind that works like that. So I don't know, I think I was naive when I did Midnighter, actually, in a way that is sweet, but also I was a different person back then, and it's interesting to me. Yes, I thought it was the stories that people need and what comics needs right now, but I could have never predicted how threatened people would be by that representation, which we've all seen. In those 6 years, we've seen that some people truly don't want everyone to be part of comics and have these stories, and that's a challenge for me. I don't know how you guys feel about it as readers and media folks, but it's hard, because I do feel like we need this work more than ever. More than ever, people need to feel like they're part of a community.
Do you feel that writing in comics has changed based on feedback or response from social media?
It hasn't for me. I can't speak for other people.
That's good. That's what I hate it when, a writer or an artist starts going, down a path, and then, all the trolls get on Twitter or whatever and start attacking comic creators, and then things change.
Well,
I hate that.
So it's saddened to me that people are so bothered by something that ultimately doesn't affect them, and oftentimes it shows their disconnection from the media that they claim to be defending. We had Wonder Woman 88 last week, and I do not sort of seek out things that I'm not tagged in on social media for my own well-being. I had a couple people directly engage me about it, because it's a book in which Maxima it goes back to Almarak and sort of makes the first start towards changing that society, which is, you find out, has been based on this hegemonic lie, this patriarchal lie, and in fact their society is founded by two women, and so Maxima can rule with a woman at her side and it doesn't have to be forced to marry Prince Ultra. And there were people not happy about that, and the few that directly engaged me, when I got through the sort of condescension, it did sadden me, because I said, you're allowed to, and these are public, so I mean, my tweets can be seen there. I said, you have every right to feel however you want about it, and oh, Maxima, you made her gay for your expletive type agenda, and yawn, a white male villain, and yawn, you made her body type less sexy and more, part of the agenda and all these things. And I said, you have every right to feel that way, but I'm just going to say this is how Maxima has been since 2015 for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And that's the truth. yeah, the people that quote unquote made Maxima gay, which is not even the case because it was a reboot, and that was just how she was reintroduced, were the folks on the Crucible arc of Supergirl, and the same folks that redesigned her for her first New 52 appearance. So it's been that way for 5 years. And it was really heartbreaking to me. I mean, that people would mind that this character was represented that way, but also it shows you this thing that you claim to feel so strongly about, you haven't even really followed or embraced, because
Right.
this news is 5 years old. And that saddens me, and to be fair, like, I wasn't mean to them, which is hard because I'm from Central New York, so my initial reaction is to just be like, "Fuck you, my friend," but I can't do that. Can't do that, and because the fact is, like, it's not productive.
Right.
But at the same time, it does sadden me because all the things that they thought had happened with this issue really just proved that they have not been following the characters they claim to be such defenders of. And
waiting,
that was very visible also when a couple years ago now, when the promotion began for the Batwoman television show, and you could see the people come out of the woodwork saying, "They had to make her gay."
How dare they? It's
Have
like, dude,
you ever
what?
picked up a comic book?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's followed me. My reverence for continuity and past stories has been a sword and a shield for many times. When I started on Supergirl, I'll always remember at the WonderCon sort of DC Rebirth premiere, I said, "Oh, well, Zor-El's Cyborg Superman," and the whole crowd like gasped, like I had just revealed something. But that was a new 50, like that had happened 4 years ago in Supergirl. In whatever the lenticular cover special that introduced Cyborg Superman before I was even at DC was, and it more showed to me, I mean, it's symptomatic of a failing on both the publishing side because we've let these fans lapse. But it was very evident as well because, like, oh, well, you think I'm spoiling something, but it's just the way that character's been for almost half a decade. Wasn't my idea in many cases. And I mean, even Maxima being queer was not my idea. I took advantage of it. But I'm very happy with that story, but it's not it's not one that came from me. So it's just, it saddens me. And I don't, and I was never that type of reader. So I've had a lot of sort of disillusionment because I realized maybe I was never the average comic reader I thought I was. And now as a creator, it's like, well, I mean, I'm only writing for myself, but maybe myself is not the average person. I don't know.
I think I honestly think the average reader person doesn't really care. It's just that on Twitter or wherever you find these small pockets of people having this outrage, it's just that's where it's all concentrated. So but yeah, you're right. It's just sad. It's sad that people are so blind. Or they have these blinders on that informs their opinions, and they're just so completely off most of the time that they don't even know what they're talking about. But that's why it's awesome to have guys like you in the industry writing what you like and what you put out. And people don't realize it's like, if you don't like something, you don't have to read it. Like, what's the point of?
Look, without naming names, because that would be unprofessional, there are plenty of books by my peers that I don't read, and some of them, by the way, are very good. They're just not my brand. Let me think of an example of someone just to prove the point. Like, okay, Wicked and Divine, a fantastic book, and I read it, and it just, like, I don't know, like the storytelling, it was sort of laconic, and it just wasn't exactly what I was looking for. But that's fine. Jamie and Kieran are great storytellers, and I'll give any new thing that they do a shot. It just wasn't my thing, and you know what? And you have to, when you like weird storytelling, like me especially, you have to understand that. Like, I love Twin Peaks, and I think it's great, but like that does not automatically mean that it's empirically great to everyone. If I showed Twin Peaks to my boyfriend, he would be like, "Well, we're not a couple now." Because,
What was that?
like 10 episodes of like, hello.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? It actually almost ended my friendship with Frank Barberi from Five Ghosts, because he was living at my house for like a couple weeks, and it started, and he had never watched it before, and the first episode he watched was this completely, I don't know if you guys watched it, but I think it was episode 8, the one that is like there's no story, it's just about like, it's all like this hour-long collage of horrific imagery about the nuclear bomb going off, and it ended, and he was just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like,
This is the new one?
Yeah. And, but the point being is, like, yes, what you guys are saying is right. Like, things can be good or bad, but they can also be good and not your thing.
Right.
And that is totally fine.
It's like, you like you were mentioning earlier, Scott had his version of Manhunter on his book, that was the main Justice League title, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So he had that team book, and it was very much like a space, like opera, like action, and they got to go back in time, they got to go to different dimensions. And yours, same character, much more human approach. Two completely different stories, two completely different books. Like, there's no point in complaining. Like, don't read it. Don't read Scott's. You know what I mean? If you don't like it, like, there's so many different choices that you can take, and it's just seeing people complain on Twitter is just it's like not Ricky Gervais has this, and people love or hate Ricky Gervais, but he has this actual funny anecdote where he talks about like someone on Twitter complaining or arguing is like walking up to someone's home, knocking on their door, and being like, "I don't want to talk to you today." It's like, okay.
I will admit, I think that social media is a boon and also sort of an albatross, because it has sort of changed the mindset, and it's not one that I'm in as a fan. Interesting. I mean, like, first of all, when I was younger, like, I did not have access to the creators of comics. I could go to Comic-Cons, and you had to go, first of all. Like, I think networking inroads through physically meeting creators, but the icons of comics for me, people like Grant. Grant lives in a fucking castle in Scotland. There's no way for me to impart to him my opinion on any of his work, good or bad. Just not possible. As a matter of fact, he doesn't do email. His wife answers his emails for him. So, like, it's impossible. And it never, by the way, would have even crossed my mind. So it is all sort of fascinating to me, because I think it has changed our culture. Like, I didn't like The Irishman, but I'm not going to, like, pay $10 for IMDb Pro, get Martin Scorsese's agent's number, and be like, "Hey, tell him to fuck off." Like, do something, old man. Like, no, I don't know. Like, it would never cross my mind. I didn't like it. That's fine. Like,
you didn't have 6 hours to burn?
Time.
It seemed like it was 6 days.
There was a lot of driving, wasn't there?
My main thing, I can't even. The main thing is, like, I understand the gimmick of the digital de-aging, but I also am kind of over it, because you can't change how someone moves. So all it looks like is old Robert De Niro in a young suit, like having arthritis and beating people up.
I didn't get They all looked really old. There was no help in that.
And also, like, I just like how Joe Pesci has got to be, like 195 years old, and his face looks like a leather purse. And it's like, I like watching him be old. He looks like his skin looks like it's orangutan face material. And I just am fascinated by watching him. Like him, I would like to watch him and Edward James Olmos have like a face contest and just like sit in a breakfast. That's a show that I would pitch.
Oh, that's a fun a combination that I've always wanted, strictly because of their accents, is a podcast by Grant Morrison and Billy Connolly. That would just be magical to listen to.
Well, I have no problem understanding Grant, but there is a non-insignificant number of people who say that his brogue is too thick to understand. I don't think so.
You know what they're talking about? What are they saying?
If you ever run into Chris Batista, he'll do his minute and a half long Grant Morrison impression, which he'll do with almost no provocation. about how Grant likes the Superman story where Superman shoots tiny Superman out of his hands.
I know we're running short on time, so do you mind, or would you like to talk about the Batman Shadow crossover that you helped create?
Sure, we can do that.
How's it going?
Dude, I love those books. And I'm glad that you said that the Shadow was one of your favorite characters, because he's also, since these have come out, become one of my favorite comic characters also. So these books kind of steered me in that path of researching and finding more comics and graphic novels about the Shadow character. Can you go into how that came to be, and the whole creative process working with Snyder and then also on your own on the sequel?
Well, I mean, like, I think it came to be because obviously Scott is well known for Batman, and we had been acquaintances. And it was no secret that I was a huge Shadow fan at DC, much like it was no secret that I was a huge Martian Manhunter fan at DC. I'd always told Dan that if they ever had a chance, if DC ever got the Shadow back or anything, that was like my thing I had to do. I would come to California and I would physically put my hands in the mouths of other people until they weren't breathing to get them out of the way to write that book. So it was well known that I liked the Shadow. So when the opportunity arose, I think it was just, people knew that Scott and I at least somewhat knew each other. And for all Scott's mastery of Batman, he wasn't that familiar with the Shadow as a character. So it just was sort of like, let's put these two folks together that really have a strong, unabashed love for these characters and see if we can't get the best story out of both of them,
And I love that with Shadow. I mean, he's kind of, gritty and dark like Batman too, but he also involves a little bit of the mysticism and supernatural element as well. And I loved how that was interweaved with Batman to also explain, he was there from the beginning and helped mold and guide Batman through his whole life's journey.
Well, and that was the key to us. We love to say that Batman's just a man. You couldn't, I'm air quoting because he's just a man with billions of dollars, but he's just a man. And part of being that is mortality. And so we realized that, at least in the bounds of this sort of closed loop of these stories where they can reference each other, that the Shadow could be sort of the living embodiment of that, and not just the fact that he maybe or maybe not guided Bruce, as you said, because you aren't sure. But by the fact that in that mystery, Bruce has decided he's the world's greatest detective. He's going to figure out who the Shadow really is. It gnaws at him. He can't stand it because he feels that as the world's greatest detective, there's nothing he can't figure out. And in the Shadow, we realize that his true power from like a tension standpoint is that he is truly unknowable. And so, as you've seen in the book, that was our big thing. We realized, like, Batman is just a man still, and so even he has some things, much like us, that he'll never know, and that's extremely hard for him. Accepting that he'll never know is nearly impossible, and once we figured that out, that's why these characters will always have this intense sort of love-hate relationship. The story sort of grew from there. But it's, the Shadow, they are very different. I mean, the Shadow influenced Batman's creation in real life, and he's in some ways less of a finished product than Batman. I love him for it. He's idiosyncratic and mean and almost like belligerently incapable of growth. I mean, Batman chooses to be Batman. The Shadow is punished into being the Shadow. And I think that there is something almost like, very endearing in his stubbornness, right? Like his own inability to realize his own bullshit. Maybe, in my opinion, makes him more relatable than Batman. But that's why I've always liked him. And yeah, and it was a chance to just present this character that sort of, for lack of a better phrase, makes Batman on some way feel the way Batman makes everyone else feel.
And then in the sequel that you wrote, by yourself, the Shadow Batman, published by Dynamite and DC, then you add Damian to the mix. Oh my God.
Yeah, that was the question of, like, how can we keep it fresh? but I think it turned out great because in some ways he sort of is a synthesis, even though he's a brightly clad character. He's sort of a synthesis of elements of Batman and the Shadow. You know, he is mean like the Shadow. He is cold and sort of, especially in this point in his career, sort of inhuman like the Shadow. But he's also analytical and, you know, still more humanistic like Batman. So putting him in there allowed it to be like, oh, you guys are like a weird crime-fighting family. Shadow's the grandfather. Batman is the son, and Damian is the grandson. And much like in real life, like there's tension between the son and the father, but then the grandson comes around, and the grandson and the grandfather kind of get each other. You know,
right? Any chance for a trilogy?
I mean, I would do it in a second, for sure. But I will say it's probably pretty unlikely because you have to align those two companies again, and plus I would have to be at DC, and I'm not there so much right now. But I mean, look, like I said, like I would write them in a second. I would write the Shadow. I would love to go back to the Shadow at some point in the future, and do a little more time with him because he is really one of my favorite characters ever. So we hope so, in some fashion. But we'll see what's up. I mean, the future is a long curve, we hope.
And this is just my own personal selfish question. Do you have any like specific Shadow recommendations, like specific titles or books to go read more of?
Oh, I mean, if you haven't read the original Chaykin miniseries from the 80s and then the follow-up by Andy Helfer and Bill Sienkiewicz and then Kyle Baker, ongoing, I would definitely read them. A lot of the way that I write him is an evolution of the way he's written there. And they've been collected by Dynamite, so they're out there.
Yeah, every time I walk into a shop, that's like first area I go to find more. I've got, this app on my phone that, you collect which issues you have and stuff like that. So I'm constantly looking for more Shadow stuff.
And he, I love those series because it shows the way he's not a good dude, right? Like he,
right.
There's no other way to say it. Like when we were working on the series, the way Scott and I talked about it is like Batman is interested in justice, but Shadow is just interested in punishment.
He's the Punisher. He's like the magical Punisher.
Yes, except for him, he's really punishing himself.
True.
Because he was a terrible, terrible person before he became Shadow.
Yeah,
and
he's atoning for his own sins. Yeah.
And so it's like the Punisher, but it's there's a little more depth to it. And so a lot of that comes from the 80s series for me. The idea that all of the people he saves you, and then suddenly you're calling him master. Like a lot of the things he does, he behaves like a villain. He's just a villain that's on our side. And even that, it's funny when you even think about the things, even in the 94 movie, which I love for all of its being a piece of shit. Even that, there's some things when you think about him, what he says to people, you're like, wow, you are kind of an asshole. Like the first guy he saves, Roy Tam, is this nuclear physicist. And he shows up and he says, I saved your life, Roy Tam, and now it belongs to me. So, everything he does is transactional. Like, he is an asshole. And I find, again, I'm just deeply fascinated by him. He is a guy who, it's nice if he saves people's lives, but what he really likes is making criminals shit themselves. And he is vengeful. I mean, he in some ways is a lot more like us. He's petty. I mean, even in that movie, Tim Curry almost kills him, and he could just stop Tim Curry later, but he drives him insane and makes him kill himself. In a very Tim Curry way. And so I mean, it's he's a complicated character, but like I said, I will always love him. And I like the idea that essentially if you're weak-minded, he has power over you if you yourself give in to fear and pettiness and all the things that of course he himself is super fucking prone to. So that perhaps it's that hypocrisy that makes me think that he's just like us. I have no idea. That's a really dark take, but there you go. So.
Yeah, it's always those complicated characters like that I think writers like yourself love to explore because they can go in so many directions with them,
No, definitely. I mean, like he's there's just so much I would like to see. There's an element. Hopefully, I get to go and write some Shadow again, because again, he's someone who only plays by his own rules, for whom there are no boundaries, which is just like what they say in The Dark Knight about Batman. And it's true, except the Shadow cares even less for the mores of society. In a world where the Shadow was real, you would hear about him haunting like world leaders and these, the like people like the Pharma Bro. Anyone who thinks there's no consequences for their actions. You know who the Pharma Bro is? Before I move on past that.
No.
No.
He's this guy that tried to privatize HIV pills and make them cost.
Oh, that
okay,
asshole.
yeah, Jesus, yeah.
But like,
Didn't
he's a guy for whom, like, when there's someone who thinks that there are no consequences, the Shadow is like the ultimate consequence, and I just love that about him. It's a fun anthology. The Spectre is like that too, by the way, on an even grander scale. But that's and I would love to write the Spectre someday. But
Ooh, Spectre Shadow crossover.
Before we run short of time here with you, a couple weeks ago we spoke with Cian Tormey, and he told us a little bit about what you guys are doing with Darkhold, that you're bookending an event over at Marvel, and at the moment, as long as nothing changes, I believe it's scheduled to come out June 24th. Do you want to take us through that at all? What to expect at all?
yeah, well, Darkhold is, and we hope it comes out then. Darkhold is built very similarly to the event I did with Gerard Way called Milk Wars, in that we're going to have these oversized bookend issues, and then we'll have these stories that happen in between that are more specifically character focused. So in Darkhold, we reveal, and I'll say a little more here. When reading about the Darkhold you've seen in the Marvel Universe, you see that it's a copy of a copy. It's a copy on parchment of a copy on stone of the original version that was written on skin, like the Necronomicon. And so at the beginning of Darkhold, Dr. Doom digs up the real version, the original version, and being Doom, immediately reads it. And even though it would cause anyone else on Earth to go mad, Doom is just fine because he's Doom. But the issue is that he's now finally made the strongest connection ever to Chthon, who is this sort of Cthulhu type character in the other realm that helped write the Darkhold. And so the story brings together Scarlet Witch and Doom, who have to dive through the book and find any type of way that they could potentially stop Chthon before he comes and invades our world in a physical form, which he's never really been able to do before. He's always had to possess like Quicksilver or Scarlet Witch or work through sort of vessels like that. But now, because they found his original book, he can just come on through. And so in doing so, we reach the Darkhold Defenders, who you'll see they're on the cover of the book. So I'm not really spoiling anything there. And they find in the sort of ancient sort of myths within the book, because Doom can read it, these 5 heroes that once drove Chthon back into the other realm at the cost of their lives, but they did. And they cast this summoning spell to find the people closest to it in the present day. And that brings us to Spider-Man, the Wasp, Blade, Black Bolt, and Iron Man. And these are the people that eventually have to make the decision, will they go to confront Chthon? To do so, they have to read from the Darkhold themselves and temper themselves. They have to go a little crazy. They have to go a little mad to be able to survive this sort of mind-bending other realm and defeat him before he can cross over. And so that decision plays big in the first issue. It's this sort of cosmic horror type take on a superhero blockbuster. And as you might imagine, they end up reading it. And then what you get in the one-shots is these sort of broken, fractious new histories that they've imagined for themselves, that they've seen for themselves in the Darkhold, where they've taken different paths that have truly driven them to ruin and madness, and made them into versions of themselves where they can survive and confront Chthon. So it'll play a little bit like Tales from the Dark Multiverse, but with a different focus for sure and different outcomes. We're working in cosmic horror, as I said, for this, and that's always sort of been our North Star. But North Star's not in it. I shouldn't have said that.
So nobody's listening to this. How does it end?
But you will see a lot of fun stuff in the second issue. I'm waiting for notes back on that. I will say I've seen the covers to the one shots, and they're really, really cool. What I really like about this is, Marvel came to me and they said, oh, well, I don't know if you've ever done anything like this before. It's 2 oversized one shots and then a bunch of one shots in the normal size one shots in the middle that other people are going to write that you have to tie together. Have you ever done anything like that? And I said, yeah, not only did I do something like that with Milk Wars, but I ran it myself, and so what I'm excited for is it really is like that, in that I'm doing the bookends and I created the skeletal structure for the whole story, but I've been very hands off and with the one shots in between, and that's just like Milk Wars. We gave core ideas to people, Gerard and I, for the one shots like the Shade the Changing Girl and Wonder Woman, for example, or Batman and Mother Panic, and then we let people go. We trusted them to do their thing, and that's what's happening here. So I've seen the covers to the one shots with these characters, and they are just really, really fun, unexpected takes that are no rules. And the joy of it is that, yeah, I actually get to step back. Well, I get to step back and sneeze in 1 second, but maybe not. But I get to step back and watch these other great creators do their thing, and then I get to come back in and sort of harness this energy they have in these one shots for this big finale that's going to come up after. And I love that, like comics are a collaboration, and there's always a push and pull between clamping down and demanding control and loosening up things, taking more risks, but letting things be more organic. And I always have, as a creator, err towards giving myself less control, because I think that also is another way of saying having more trust in your collaborators. And when people feel trusted and respected, they do their best work possible. So that's how I have done books like Martian Manhunter with Riley. I mean, to actually kind of tie this whole podcast together, we use an open script style where I don't dictate paneling to him, because I know and trust him enough to do what he does best, better than I can imagine it. And with a thing like Darkhold, we're sort of scaling it up. We have teams that I know are incredible on these one-shots, and we wouldn't have wanted them as part of this event if we didn't know they were great. So now it's time for us to get out of the way and let them do their best work possible in the center, and then we all bring it around for this massive Hail Mary double-size issue, the Omega issue coming after.
And if anyone isn't familiar with it yet and wants to get an example of what to expect with Darkhold, if you aren't familiar with what Milk Wars was, so Milk Wars was Steve worked on that with Gerard Way. It was sort of a crossover between the main DC universe and the Young Animals imprint, which was became the home for like Doom Patrol, Mother Panic, Shade the Changing Girl. And if you check that out, not only will it give you sort of an example of what the format is with Darkhold, but might also pique some interest for you into the Young Animal stuff like Jody Houser's Mother Panic, Gerard Way's Doom Patrol. There's a lot of good stuff there that's a good doorway to.
And it's one of my favorite things that I'm able to be part of. I mean, it's not something I did myself, so I always like to say I'm part of it, but like there are things that I got to write Batman and Flex Mentallo on the same page. I'm greedy. That I never thought I'd be able to do. Flex Mentallo is my favorite book, so it's a wild event. There's stuff you won't see anywhere else. There's stuff that actually ended up in the Doom Patrol show that shocked me and Gerard, actually, from that event. But we'd love for you to check it out.
Excellent. Well, Gramps, do you want to hit up a lightning round there before we get out of here?
Sure. So, Steve, what this is that, I know we're close to and almost out of time, but, we just want to get to know you a little bit better and ask some silly, stupid questions that we, get to know our creators, more as friends than just, guests on the show. So, being from New York, this is the obligatory question. Which do you like, deep dish or New York style pizza?
Well, you've only mentioned one kind of pizza in that question.
Yeah, exactly. The other is soup, right?
No, let me say this. The real answer is I like Chicago deep dish. My only quarrel is with the naming of it, but it's delicious. Like, I'm not one of those people like Frank Thierry who's going to be like, fuck that garbage, fuck it. Throw that piece of shit on the floor and fuck you for looking. No, whatever. Like,
That is, I sent I just want to interject. I sent Frank a message a while back, and when he didn't reply to it, I just sent like a little ahem, and he replied like, "Yeah, fuck you, I see it."
Oh, Frank! Listen, short anecdote about Frank. One of my favorite people in comics. Controversial, but has always been on a person-to-person level an incredible dude to me. Even when I had some shit going on in my life. So, but also also the most unpretentious person I've ever met. So we're down. It's a 2-part story, and we can go long for it. So I'm at this show in Long Island. It doesn't matter where it is because it wasn't super well attended. But Frank is there, and I'm there, and also other Frank Barberi is there. And we're sitting there, and this kid comes up to Thierry, and he'll deny this to this day, but it is true. And I shouldn't say kid, probably 14 to 16 years old. Comes up to him with a copy of Space Punisher. And he's like, oh, Mr. Thierry, it's really great to meet you. This is my favorite book. I love Space Punisher. And without missing a beat, he's just like, fuck you, kid. No, you don't. Nobody likes that book. Straight up, destroys this kid's soul. Obviously signs the book and pisses him off in his way. So I'm telling this story years later in Kansas City, and we're out with me, Frank, and Jason Aaron, and I think Tynan is there. Oh, Tynan is there because he loved Thierry's response to this. So I tell this story, and Jason's dying, and Tynan is dying, and Thierry is looking salty over there, looking like Silvio from The Sopranos with their shoulders hunched up. And Jason just goes, but Frank, what is Space Punisher? I didn't even know we did that book. And again, perfect Thierry response. He just looks at the table. He just goes, fucking Punisher in space. Fuck you. Got a ponytail. Fuck off.
Got a ponytail.
Yeah. So that is all to say. And actually, Frank did tell me I have a thing where we're at cons together. I try to find out what his room number is at hotels because I want to send him a local pizza. When we met, he said if you send me a fucking piece of pizza from this shit town, I will throw that piece of garbage on the floor. And I want to see it happen. So he never tells me what room he's in. But anyway, this is all to say, Chicago deep dish is delicious. I'm not one of those assholes, but it's not pizza, okay? And by the way, I live in Boston now, and when my neighbor, who was the Grand Marshal of Boston Pride, we're at dinner, and he was like, "Well, Steve, you're so pretentious. My favorite type of pizza is Boston-style pizza." And I was like, "Dale, you deserve to be a fucking ghost right now."
What is Boston pizza?
Flavorless and mind-bendingly bad. That's what it is.
Okay, being that you live in Boston, where do you park your car?
Jesus Christ. I have a parking spot. I have an overpriced parking spot because of our bizarre draconian street cleaning schedule. So thank you, Boston.
Okay. Well, what is your dream car?
I fucking hate all of you. No, I bizarrely want to own a not shitty version of the first car I ever drove, which is my parents' car from the early 2000s, which is very unromantic. It's a not the latest model, but the model before Pontiac Bonneville, and that is the most boring answer, but I just want one because it was my parents' car, and I want to claim superiority by owning one now as an adult. So I would like a 1999 Pontiac Bonneville or 98, which I can now get. I've looked on Auto Trader for $1,000. I'm sure it runs great. So
it's like getting back your childhood phone number and be like, "Look, Mom and Dad, it's my number now."
Yes, low stakes for that one for me, but that's the real answer.
All right, and this is the last one. We've kind of got this little tradition going where the creators basically answer a question, and then they come up with the next question for the next guy. And I forgot who asked this question, but listen to this and think about this.
This is key.
This is a real asshole question. If two people are stranded on the moon and one killed the other, would that be fucked up?
If two men are on the moon and one man kills the other one with a rock, Would that be fucked up? And that was from
Yeah.
Donnie Cates.
Yeah. Would that be fucked up?
Oh, of course that's from Donnie. No, that's how Rome was founded. What is he talking about? It would be historic. That's true, actually. As true as Roman history is. Donnie? I expected better out of him.
Well, the story is that's a question that was emailed to Donnie and Ryan Stegman for their podcast. So Donnie transplanted it to ours to pose it to us because he likes to get into all of the complexities of it, like, what were the circumstances,
Right.
and why was he killing him, and etc.
But the real telling thing about Donnie is that it had to be it's not like if some guy kills another guy with a rock, is that fucked up? It's like, is it fucked up if it's on the moon? Because otherwise, totally.
Exactly.
So it's more the syntax of the question that's fascinating to me. To be fair, I've never been to Austin, so I don't know what goes on there, but. I have been to Dallas, but yeah, I would say it's momentous, not fucked up. That's my answer.
Okay. If you could make up a question for the next guest, what would you like to ask? And it can be anything.
Who is it?
Doesn't matter.
Oh, but it does.
Let me see who is our next. I don't know if. Oh, yeah, you might know him. Our next guest will be Jason Fabuk, actually.
I do know Jay a little bit. He's a very nice Canadian.
Yep.
Um,
He's local for me here. He lives about 20 minutes away from me.
He's in my top 10 Canadians, but he's behind David Finch and Chris Jericho and and Vampiro. So he's still in the top 10 though. Oh, and Ed Brisson. Yeah, maybe he's not. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, a random ass question.
Yeah. While you think about it, I'll give you a minute to think about it, and I'll just say that when you told that story of Frank yelling at a kid, I was hoping that the twist was, due to his propensity for being yelled at, that little kid was going to turn out to have been Cian Tormey. Because he told us a story of being yelled at by Klaus Janson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't even know that about Cian. We only DM because of the weird time difference.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, so there's a public domain Jack Kirby character named the Vagabond Prince, who is a greeting card writer by day and a vigilante by night. And I would like to know what the best name for his sidekick is. And his
name for sidekick. Okay.
Is the Vagabond Prince, and he is a greeting card writer by night who gets pushed too far and becomes a vigilante. This is all true. He does have a real sidekick in real life, but fuck that. I want to know what you think it would be for a greeting card writing vigilante.
Best name for sidekick.
And now, optional. Is Jay going to be required to draw said sidekick?
If you can get him to do it, absolutely.
We'll shoot for it.
He actually has two sidekicks. Fuck. So I'll give you guys the secret answer.
What is he, Batman?
I know. He has a boy sidekick named Chief Justice. And then he also has what appears to be a middle-aged sidekick named the Jester, whose real name is Falstaff. So it was a book filled with subtle literary allusions.
So that should play into his choice then.
If you can get Fabok to draw the Vagabond Prince or his hypothetical sidekick for this podcast, that would be hilarious. It is.
It might be. I was just talking to him yesterday, and he has as few places to go as the rest of us do. So.
Vagabond Prince looks like if Jack Kirby adapted the musical The Music Man. It's not a great design. I'll send you the link right now. Anyway, that's my question.
Awesome.
All
We'll
right.
ask it, and I'll let you know if we get an illustration out of it.
Thank God. Be the best redesign that Jay's ever done, hands down, and he's already done some great ones, but nothing will compare it to Vagabond Prince. Look at his stupid hat. I just sent it to Robin because that's the email I have.
Open up my email here.
But it's real. It's created by Simon and Kirby, man. Why didn't he end up like Captain America? We don't know. We're not sure.
Could have been the hat. I don't know.
Refresh my email here.
But
There we go.
But-
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, I'm gonna save this picture and I'm gonna put it up so the other guys can see it here.
Hey, Steve, before we let you go, could we ask a favor and have like a tag that we can put at the end of the episode, just saying this is Steve Orlando, you're listening to Bat Force Radio, or something simple like that.
yeah, just tell me when to say it.
Go for it.
Hey, folks, this is Steve Orlando, and you are listening to Bat Force Radio.
That was one of the most professional ones we've
I
ever
was
heard.
going to say, that's like the best one we've ever had.
Well,
And we've had like polar opposites. We had Paul Dini, because he's done voice acting. He just, without prompting, went through like 8 different versions of it, just chained them all together. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you have Tom King, who you can hear him in the beginning, in the intros of our episodes. He just says, "This is Tom King. I write Batman, bitch."
well, Tom, like, his anxiety is probably such that he can't even make eye contact with the icon of you guys on Skype, so it's got to be hard for him.
All right, man.
I will
thank
say,
you.
dunking on Tom, we are friends, by the way. I just like Tom and I have the most sullen opinions as beleaguered half Jews that I've ever met in real life, and we were just on the phone yesterday, and there's no amount of self-deprecation that here I will not perpetrate. So it's stunning. It's stunning. But anytime I make a joke about Tom on social, just so you know, it's one he's made about himself, and that's why it's extra entertaining to me.
Well, I really appreciate the time. We will let you get back to your workouts and the rest of your workday. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and everyone watch out for Darkhold. Hopefully books are not pushed back, rescheduled as a result of everything that's happening, but we look forward to it.
All right, thank you, folks. We'll see you soon.
Thanks,
All right,
Steve.
thank
Have
you.
a good day.
Yep.
Bye-bye.